The transport ship landed in a cloud of red dust just after dawn, its hull scarred and patched from too many emergency repairs. Vincent Harper stood on the landing pad with his clipboard, watching refugees stumble down the ramp with whatever they could carry. New Haven Colony desperately needed workers, and Vincent needed one worker in particular. He needed someone who could teach his militia how to fight before the pirates came back. The last raid had been a disaster. 3 supply convoys destroyed, 12 colonists dead, and his militia had barely fired a shot before retreating. Kyle Morrison, his best fighter, was brave but reckless. The others were farmers and engineers playing soldier. They needed a real instructor, someone with military experience. Vincent had been promised that someone with the right skills would be on this transport. He interviewed candidates all morning in a prefab shelter near the landing pad, a former Navy cook who claimed he had seen combat, a cargo pilot who insisted she had once flown gunships, a maintenance tech who said he had guarded a base somewhere. All of them were lying or exaggerating, and Vincent could tell. He was running out of time and patience when the last man walked in. Daniel Gray looked like he had spent his whole life carrying heavy things. He was somewhere in his 50s, with gray threading through his dark hair and deep lines around his eyes. His clothes were worn but clean. His hands were calloused and scarred. He sat down slowly, like his back hurt, and folded those scarred hands on the table between them. "Name?" Vincent asked, though he already had the refugee manifest. "Daniel Gray. Says here you worked cargo handling on Station Meridian before the attack." "That's right. Any military experience?" Daniel was quiet for a moment, his eyes focused somewhere past Vincent's shoulder. "Some. A long time ago." Vincent waited, but Daniel didn't elaborate. Most veterans love to talk about their service, especially the ones who had never seen real action. This man's silence was different. Vincent noticed how Daniel sat, back straight without leaning on the chair, how his eyes had already mapped every exit in the room, how his hands rested ready but relaxed. "What kind of experience?" Vincent pressed. "Some field work." Daniel's voice was quiet, steady, almost deliberately flat. "When?" 30 years back, around the Kryn conflict. Vincent's interest sharpened. The Kryn War had been brutal, humanity's first real test against a hostile alien species. Anyone who served in that war had seen things. "What unit?" 3rd Battalion, supply and logistics mostly. Daniel met his eyes for the first time. "Look, I'm not looking for anything fancy. Just a place to work, somewhere quiet. I can lift, I can organize, I can follow orders. If you don't have anything, I understand." There it was again, that deliberate downplaying. Vincent had interviewed enough people to know when someone was hiding something, but he also knew desperation when he saw it, and this man was desperate for quiet, for anonymity. That suggested either a criminal past or something else entirely. "I'm not hiring for cargo work right now," Vincent said. "What I need is someone who can train our colonial militia. Basic combat skills, defensive tactics, how to not die when pirates show up. The pay isn't great, but you'd get private quarters and 3 meals a day." Daniel started to shake his head. "I don't think that's for me. You'd only be teaching basics. These are farmers and technicians, not soldiers. They just need to know how to defend their homes long enough for Navy support to arrive. There are better people for that job. Not on this colony, there aren't." Vincent leaned forward. "I've got 73 people in the militia. Half of them have never fired a weapon outside a shooting range. Last month, pirates hit our northern farms and my people panicked. Good people died because no one knew what to do. I need someone who's been there, who knows what real combat looks like." Daniel was quiet again, his jaw working like he was chewing on words he didn't want to say. Finally, he spoke. "Real combat isn't something you want to teach people. It changes them. The pirates are going to change them worse if we're not ready." For a long moment, Daniel just looked at him. Vincent got the strange feeling he was being evaluated, measured against some invisible standard. Then Daniel sighed, and it sounded like a man accepting a burden he'd hoped to avoid. "All right," Daniel said quietly. "I'll do it. But I teach my way. No heroics, no glory. Just survival skills." "Deal," Vincent said, relief washing through him. "Report to the training ground tomorrow at 0600. I'll introduce you to the militia." They shook hands, and Vincent noticed the strength in Daniel's grip, carefully controlled. As Daniel left, Vincent wondered what he had just hired. The man moved wrong for a cargo handler, too aware, too economical in his movements. But New Haven needed help, and Vincent would take what he could get. The next morning, Vincent brought Daniel to the training ground where the militia was assembled. 73 colonists in mismatched gear, holding rifles like unfamiliar tools. Kyle Morrison stood at the front, tall and confident, his weapon held with practiced ease. He was 26 and thought he knew everything about fighting because he'd been in a few brawls and played soldier simulation games back on Earth. "Everyone, this is Daniel Gray," Vincent announced. "He's your new combat instructor. You'll give him the same respect you'd give me." Kyle looked Daniel up and down and didn't bother hiding his smirk. "No offense, sir, but shouldn't we have someone younger? Someone who's actually fought recently?" A few militia members chuckled. Daniel didn't react, just stood there with his hands loose at his sides, watching them all with those tired eyes. "You have a problem with the assignment, Morrison?" Vincent asked sharply. "No, sir, just making an observation." Kyle's tone said he had several more observations ready. Daniel stepped forward. His voice was quiet enough that everyone had to stop talking to hear him. "I'm not here to impress you. I'm here to keep you alive when things go wrong. If you want someone to make you feel like heroes, you've got the wrong man. If you want to learn how to survive and protect your families, then shut up and pay attention." The simplicity of it, the complete lack of anger or pride, caught them off guard. Kyle opened his mouth to respond, but Vincent cut him off. "Instructor Gray has the floor. Let's begin." Daniel walked to the equipment table and picked up a training rifle. "We'll start with basics. Stance, grip, sight picture. Some of you think you already know this. You don't. Not the way you'll need to when someone's shooting back." He began the lesson, his voice never rising, never pushing. Just steady instruction, patient correction. The militia followed along, some grudgingly, some genuinely interested. Kyle went through the motions with obvious boredom. It was during a basic movement drill, 4 hours into the session, when everything changed. The recruits were practicing movement between cover positions when someone made a mistake. Private Chen, a nervous young man who worked in hydroponics, pulled the pin on a practice grenade but fumbled the throw. The grenade slipped from his sweaty fingers and rolled across the dirt, coming to rest 15 feet away from a group of clustered militia members. Except it wasn't a practice grenade. Someone had mixed up the equipment, and what sat on the ground was live ordnance with maybe 4 seconds left on the fuse. Everything seemed to happen in slow motion. Chen's face went white. The nearby militia members froze, their minds unable to process the danger fast enough. Kyle saw it and stumbled backward, his training forgotten in pure panic. Daniel was 20 feet away talking to another recruit about proper trigger discipline. He moved before anyone else even understood what was happening. One moment he was standing still. The next he was sprinting across the distance with a speed that seemed impossible for a man his age. His movements were fluid, economical, like water flowing downhill. He reached the grenade, scooped it up without breaking stride, and continued running toward the edge of the training ground. He threw it with perfect form, just as he dove behind a concrete barrier. The grenade exploded in midair over the empty desert, the blast wave rolling across the training ground like thunder. Dust and smoke billowed up, and then there was silence. Daniel stood up, brushed the dirt off his shirt, and walked back to where Chen was still frozen in terror. His breathing wasn't even elevated. He put a hand on Chen's shoulder, his voice as calm as if nothing had happened. "Check your equipment before you handle it every single time. No exceptions." He turned to address the whole group, who were staring at him with wide eyes. "That's why we have protocols. Follow them and you live. Ignore them and people die. Let's take 5 minutes, then we'll continue." Vincent arrived running, having seen the explosion from his office. "What the hell happened?" Kyle answered before Daniel could, his voice shaken. "There was a live grenade mixed in with the practice ones. Gray saved our lives." Vincent looked at Daniel with new understanding, but Daniel just shrugged. Someone made a mistake in the armory. Might want to check the rest of the equipment. For the rest of that day, the militia trained in absolute silence, following every instruction Daniel gave without question. Kyle kept glancing at their instructor like he was seeing him for the first time. When the session ended at 1800 hours, the recruits dispersed quietly, talking in hushed groups. Kyle stayed behind, watching Daniel secure the weapons and equipment with methodical precision. Everything had its place. Everything was checked twice. These weren't the habits of a cargo handler. "That was incredible," Kyle said finally. Daniel didn't look up from inspecting a rifle. "That was basic threat response. You all should have moved faster. I've never seen anyone move like that. How long were you really in the service?" "Long enough." Daniel set the rifle in its rack and turned to face Kyle. "You've got good instincts, Morrison, but you rely too much on courage and not enough on thinking. Brave gets you killed if you're not smart about it." Kyle nodded slowly. Can you teach me? Really teach me, I mean. Not just the basics. I'm teaching you survival. That's all anyone needs. I don't think that's all you know. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. What I know comes with a price. You don't want to pay it.
He walked away, leaving Kyle standing alone in the fading light.
But Kyle couldn't let it go. That night after his shift, he sat in his small quarters and started searching. He used the colony's limited database access to dig through military records from the Kryn conflict. Most files from that era were classified or heavily redacted, but Kyle was persistent. He started with Daniel's supposed unit, the 3rd Battalion Supply and Logistics. The unit existed, but the records were sparse. Then he expanded his search, looking for any Daniel Gray who served during the conflict. There were dozens, but most were too young or had service records that didn't fit. It was almost midnight when Kyle found it, buried in a declassified after-action report from the Battle of Kepler Station. The report mentioned a special operations unit that held off a Kryn assault for 3 days against impossible odds. The unit designation was redacted, but there was a photograph at the bottom of the file, grainy and marked as historical record. 12 soldiers stood in combat gear, their faces hard and young. The caption read, 3rd Special Operations Unit after the relief of Kepler Station. In the center stood a younger man, his eyes already carrying that same tired weight Kyle recognized. The name below the photo said Lieutenant Commander Daniel Gray. Kyle's hands shook as he searched for more information. He found scattered references, most classified, but enough to piece together a story. The Wraith of Kepler Station. That's what they'd called him. The soldier who became a legend during humanity's darkest hour against the Kryn. The man who led 12 operators to hold a critical station against a full Kryn battalion, using tactics so unconventional that they were still studied in military academies. Only 3 of those 12 soldiers survived the battle. Daniel Gray was one of them. After the war ended, he was awarded humanity's highest military honors. Then, according to the records, he retired from service and disappeared from public life. No interviews, no speeches, no consulting positions. Just gone. Kyle sat back, his mind racing. Their quiet instructor, the man who apologized for being old and slow, was one of the most decorated soldiers in human history. The man who pirates in 3 sectors still told stories about, not knowing he was real. The next morning, Kyle waited until the training session ended before approaching Daniel. The older man was cleaning weapons again, his movements precise and practiced. I know who you are, Kyle said quietly. Daniel's hands paused for just a fraction of a second, then continued working. Do you? Lieutenant Commander Daniel Gray? 3rd Special Operations Unit. The Wraith of Kepler Station. Kyle kept his voice low, making sure no one else could hear. You're the most decorated soldier from the Kryn War. You held Kepler Station for 3 days with 12 men against hundreds of Kryn. They made documentaries about you. Daniel set down the weapon he was cleaning and turned to face Kyle fully. His expression was unreadable. And what do you plan to do with that information? I don't know. I just want to understand why you're here, pretending to be nobody. Daniel looked out across the training ground, watching the last few militia members walking back toward the colony buildings. When he spoke, his voice was soft, almost sad. Because being somebody cost me everything that mattered. The war ended, and everyone wanted the Wraith. They wanted speeches and strategies and consulting fees. They wanted me to teach governments how to kill more efficiently. They wanted a symbol, a weapon they could point at the next threat. He turned back to Kyle. But I was just a man who watched his friends die. A man who came home to find his wife and daughter had been killed in a Kryn raid while I was off being a hero somewhere else. Kyle felt the words like a physical blow. I'm sorry. No one knew. I made sure of that when I disappeared. I spent 30 years being nobody, working quiet jobs, moving from place to place. I was good at it until I ended up here. Daniel's jaw tightened. I came here to hide, Morrison, to be left alone. And now you found me out. I won't tell anyone, Kyle said immediately. Your secret is safe. Why? Because you came here to escape, and we need you to want to stay. Kyle met his eyes steadily. Not the legend, just Daniel Gray, the man who actually gives a damn about keeping us alive. Daniel studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right. But this conversation never happened. As far as everyone else knows, I'm just an old cargo handler who got lucky with a grenade. Agreed. They shook hands, an understanding passing between them. But even as Kyle walked away, he couldn't shake the feeling that the past wasn't done with Daniel Gray yet, and in the quiet of the desert night, neither could Daniel. 3 weeks after Daniel began training the militia, the intelligence reports started coming in. Vincent called an emergency meeting of the Colony Council, and for the first time he asked Daniel to attend. They gathered in the main administration building, a dozen council members sitting around a salvaged conference table while wind howled against the windows outside. Vincent activated the holographic display in the center of the table. It showed star charts and ship movements, red markers indicating hostile contacts. This is what Navy intelligence sent us 2 days ago. The pirates who've been hitting our convoys aren't random raiders. They're scouts for something much worse. The hologram zoomed in on a cluster of ships hiding in an asteroid field 3 systems away. The design was unmistakable, all sharp angles and organic curves. Kryn warships. That's impossible, said Councilwoman Patricia Webb, her face pale. The Kryn splinter fleets were destroyed 30 years ago. We wiped them out. Apparently not all of them, Vincent said grimly. Intelligence believes this is what's left of War Leader Krath's fleet. They've been hiding, rebuilding, staying off our sensors, and now they found us. Daniel sat quietly in the corner, but his eyes were locked on the display. His jaw was tight, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair. Vincent continued, There's more. They're not just interested in the colony. They've identified someone here, someone they have a personal grudge against. He looked at Daniel. They're looking for you. The council members turned to stare at Daniel, confusion on most of their faces. Kyle, who was there as militia commander, remained silent, his expression carefully neutral. I don't understand, said Councilman Frank Porter. Daniel's a cargo worker. Why would the Kryn care about him? Vincent hesitated, then said, Because he's not just a cargo worker. His real name is Lieutenant Commander Daniel Gray. During the Kryn War, he led the defense of Kepler Station. He killed War Leader Krath's eldest son during that battle. The room erupted in shocked voices. Daniel sat perfectly still, accepting their stares without flinching. The Kryn have long memories, Vincent said over the noise. Krath's second son, Vrak Tur, commands this fleet. Intelligence intercepts suggest this isn't just about the colony anymore. It's personal. They want Gray. Patricia stood up, her voice shaking. Then we give him to them. We're 400 civilians trying to farm and build a life. We can't fight a Kryn war fleet because of one man's past. You want to hand me over, I'll go, Daniel said quietly. I never meant to bring this here. Absolutely not, Kyle said, standing up. Daniel's been training us for weeks. He's part of this colony now. Part of this colony? Patricia's voice rose. He's a liability. He brought death to our doorstep. Frank nodded in agreement. We should contact the Kryn. Tell them we'll surrender Gray if they leave the colony alone. It's the only rational choice. Vincent raised his hands. That's not how the Kryn work. They don't honor deals with humans. If we show weakness, they'll take Gray and then destroy us anyway. It's in their nature. So what do you suggest? Patricia demanded. We fight. We're farmers and engineers against Kryn warriors. We evacuate, said another councilman. Load everyone on transports and run. Run where? Kyle asked. The nearest colony is 3 weeks away. Their fleet will catch us in open space. At least here we have defensive positions. The argument continued, voices rising and overlapping. Daniel listened to them debate his fate, his existence, like he wasn't sitting right there. Finally, he stood up. Can I speak? The room fell silent. Daniel moved to stand near the holographic display, his posture relaxed but his eyes serious. Most of you don't know me. You've seen me around for a few weeks teaching your militia basic drills. You have every right to be angry that I brought this trouble here. But before you decide what to do, I want to tell you about Kepler Station. He touched the display, changing it to show an old photograph. A space station, small and battered, floating against the stars. Kepler was a research outpost. 300 people, mostly scientists and their families. When the Kryn invaded our space, Kepler was one of the first places they hit. They wanted it because of its location, its sensor arrays. Daniel's voice remained calm, but something flickered in his eyes. I was sent there with 11 other soldiers. Our job was to hold the station for 24 hours while civilians evacuated. The Kryn sent a full battalion. 600 warriors against 12 of us. He zoomed in on another photo, showing civilians boarding evacuation ships. The scientists could have run immediately. They could have left us to fight alone, but they stayed. Engineers rigged defenses. Medical staff treated our wounded. A botanist named Helen Chen, who'd never held a weapon, manned a security checkpoint for 16 hours straight. A cargo supervisor named Marcus Wells organized supply runs under fire. Daniel looked around the room. Those people weren't soldiers. They were just like you. But they understood something important. We were all in it together. The Kryn didn't care who was a warrior and who was a civilian. To them, we were all targets. "What happened?" asked a young councilman named Peter Hayes. "We held for 3 days instead of 1. We made the Kryn pay for every corridor, every room. And because those civilians stood with us instead of running, because they gave us time and support and courage, 273 of them made it out alive." Daniel's voice dropped. 27 didn't. Neither did 9 of my soldiers. But we held. He turned off the display. "I'm not telling you this to brag or to convince you I'm some kind of hero. I'm telling you because you have a choice to make, and you should know what's possible when ordinary people decide to stand together." Patricia's anger had faded to uncertainty. "You're saying we should fight? I'm saying you should decide what kind of people you want to be? If you want to evacuate, I'll help organize it and then turn myself over to buy you time. If you want to negotiate, I'll support that too, even though it won't work. But if you decide to stand and defend your homes, I'll teach you everything I know. Not to make you into soldiers, but to give you a real chance." Frank shook his head. "Even with your training, we're not soldiers. The odds are impossible." "The odds at Kepler were impossible too," Kyle said. "But they did it." Daniel nodded. "And we had worse equipment than you do here. You have defensive terrain, fortified positions, and 3 weeks to prepare. Most importantly, you have something to fight for. The Kryn are coming either way. The question is whether you face them on your feet or on your knees." Vincent looked around the table. "We need to vote. All in favor of evacuation?" 3 hands went up, including Patricia and Frank. "All in favor of attempting negotiation?" 2 more hands. "All in favor of staying and fighting?" Kyle's hand shot up immediately. Peter raised his slowly. Then others followed until 7 hands were raised. "Motion to defend the colony carries," Vincent said. He looked at Daniel. "Looks like you're our commanding officer now." "No," Daniel said firmly. "Vincent is still in charge. I'm just the instructor, but I need full authority over defensive preparations and militia training. No arguments, no committee decisions. When it comes to combat, people follow orders or people die." Vincent nodded. "Done. What do you need? Time, resources, and people willing to work hard. We've got 3 weeks before that fleet arrives. It's not much, but it's enough if everyone commits." Daniel looked around the room. "I won't lie to you. Some of us probably won't survive this. But I promise you this. I'll give you every tool, every tactic, every piece of knowledge I have. They're going to find out that legends are made from ordinary people who refuse to quit." Patricia stood up, her expression resigned but determined. "I voted against this, but the colony has decided. Tell me what you need from the medical staff." One by one, the other council members made the same commitment. Even Frank, though he looked terrified, agreed to help. As the meeting dispersed, Kyle approached Daniel. That was quite a speech. "It was the truth," Daniel said quietly. "I just hope I can keep the promises I made. You held Kepler for 3 days against a battalion. This should be easy compared to that." Daniel shook his head. "Kepler was different. I was younger, faster, and I had professional soldiers with me. Here, I'm old and tired, and I have to turn farmers into fighters in 3 weeks." He looked at Kyle. "But we're going to try anyway. Starting tomorrow, training becomes intense. No more basic drills. I'm teaching them real combat." "They're ready," Kyle said. "No," Daniel replied. "They're not." "But they will be." Outside, the colony lights flickered against the dark desert sky. 3 weeks until the Kryn arrived. 3 weeks to turn hope into survival. The transformation of New Haven began the next morning before sunrise. Daniel stood in the center of the colony with Vincent and Kyle, looking at a holographic map projected from a portable terminal. The colony spread across a shallow valley, surrounded by rocky hills and desert scrubland. "The Kryn will land here, here, and here," Daniel said, marking 3 points around the colony's perimeter. "They like to surround their targets, cut off escape routes. They'll expect us to huddle in the center and wait to die." "So we don't do that," Vincent said. "Exactly."
"We make this valley a maze. Every building becomes a strong point.
"Every alley becomes a kill zone. We fight in layers, falling back through prepared positions, making them bleed for every meter." Daniel zoomed in on the northern hills. "We'll put our primary defensive line here. Good sight lines, hard to approach. When that falls, we collapse to secondary positions around the main buildings." Kyle studied the map. "That's a lot of ground to cover with 70 people." 68 now," Daniel corrected. Patricia convinced 5 people to leave on the last transport yesterday. Can't blame 'em, but you're right, we're spread thin. That's why we're not trying to hold everything, we're channeling them where we want them, into places we've prepared. For the next 3 weeks, the colony became a construction site and boot camp combined. Daniel ran training sessions from dawn until dark, pushing the militia harder than they'd ever been pushed. No more simple drills. Now they'd practice combat scenarios, moving under fire, treating wounded while being shot at, fighting in confined spaces. Laura Martinez, a young woman who worked in the colony's water treatment plant, struggled with the physical demands at first. She was small, barely 5 feet tall, and the combat rifle felt huge in her hands. After a particularly difficult drill where she'd frozen under pressure, she sat on the ground fighting back tears of frustration. Daniel crouched beside her. You're thinking too much. Your body knows what to do. Trust your training. I'm not strong like Kyle or the others, Laura said. When the shooting starts for real, I'm going to get someone killed. Strength isn't about muscles, Daniel said quietly. At Kepler, our best sniper was a woman named Grace, who was smaller than you. She couldn't carry as much gear as the big guys, but she saved more lives than anyone because she stayed calm and made every shot count. You've got steady hands and a good eye. That's what matters. He helped her up. Let's go again. This time, don't think. Just move and shoot like we practiced. They ran the drill again. This time, Laura moved through it smoothly, her shots accurate, her transitions clean. When she finished, Daniel nodded approval. See? You just needed to get out of your own way. Between training sessions, Daniel supervised the fortification work. Mining equipment became improvised barriers. Prefab storage units were repositioned to create choke points. The colony's limited supply of explosives was carefully placed in areas where Kryn forces would likely concentrate. In the evenings, Daniel worked on a secret project in the abandoned mining facility at the colony's edge. Kyle found him there one night, surrounded by parts scavenged from ore processing equipment. What is this? Kyle asked, looking at the massive device taking shape. Ground-to-orbit cannon, Daniel said, not looking up from his welding work. One shot, but if we time it right, we can cripple their flagship shield generators. You built a spaceship weapon from mining equipment? Not the first time I've improvised. At Kepler, we turned a water purification system into an electrified barrier. You use what you have. Daniel set down his tools and wiped sweat from his forehead. This is our insurance policy. If things go completely wrong, this might give the evacuees enough time to get away. Planning an evacuation? I'm planning for every possibility. There's a network of maintenance tunnels under the colony that lead to an old survey station 5 miles east. If we can't hold, civilians go through the tunnels while we buy them time. Kyle was quiet for a moment. You're planning to be the one who buys that time, aren't you? Daniel didn't answer, which was answer enough. As the days passed, Daniel found himself growing close to the people he was training. Chen, who dropped the grenade, became one of their best scouts, his natural nervousness making him cautious and thorough. Frank Porter, despite voting against fighting, turned out to have a talent for logistics, keeping the militia supplied and organized. Even Patricia, who still thought the whole thing was madness, worked tirelessly preparing the medical center for casualties. One evening, 2 weeks into training, Laura approached Daniel after the session ended. Can I ask you something personal? Sure. Kyle told me you lost your family during the war. I'm sorry, but I wanted to ask, why did you disappear afterward? You were a hero. You could have done anything. Daniel was silent for a long time, staring out at the desert horizon. My wife's name was Helen. My daughter was Grace, same as my sniper at Kepler. I named her after my friend who died there. He took a breath. They were killed in a Kryn raid on Earth while I was at Kepler becoming a legend. I came home to find them gone. That wasn't your fault. I know, but it didn't matter. Everyone wanted me to keep being the Wraith, keep fighting, keep making speeches about sacrifice and duty. They wanted me to weaponize my grief, turn it into something useful for the next war. I couldn't do it. Every time I put on the uniform, I saw their faces. So I took it off and walked away. Laura nodded slowly. And now? Now I'm just trying to make sure what happened to my family doesn't happen to anyone else's. It's not about glory or revenge. It's just about protecting people who matter. You matter too, Laura said softly. I hope you know that. Before Daniel could respond, alarms blared across the colony. Vincent's voice came over the communication system. All personnel to defensive positions. Long-range sensors have detected the Kryn fleet. They'll be here in 6 hours. The training was over. The real fight was beginning. Daniel stood in the command center with Vincent, Kyle, and the other militia leaders, watching the sensors track 3 Kryn cruisers entering orbit. The ships were massive, dark shapes that blotted out the stars. "How many Kryn?" Vincent asked. "Estimates say 200 warriors spread across the 3 ships," Daniel said. "They'll send down half in the first wave, keep the rest in reserve. 100 against 68, Kyle said. "Those are better odds than Kepler. Different circumstances. At Kepler we had corridors and airlocks, limited approach vectors. Here it's open terrain. They have more room to maneuver." Daniel pointed at the display. "But we have preparation and home ground advantage. And we have something they don't expect." "What's that?" Vincent asked. "People who refuse to be victims." The Kryn began their descent, drop pods burning through the atmosphere like falling stars. Daniel watched them land exactly where he'd predicted, forming a perimeter around the colony. Through the command center windows, he could see militia members moving to their assigned positions, scared but determined. "All units report ready," Kyle said, listening to his comb. Daniel picked up the colony-wide radio. "This is Daniel Gray to all defenders. The Kryn are here. They think this will be easy. They think we're soft because we're civilians, because we're human. They're wrong. You've trained hard. You know your positions. You know your jobs. Trust yourselves and trust each other. We're not just fighting for survival. We're fighting for our home. Make them understand that every meter of New Haven costs blood." He set down the radio and checked his own weapon, an old rifle he'd carried at Kepler, kept hidden all these years. Vincent noticed. "Is that?" "Yeah. Figured if I'm doing this, might as well use familiar tools." The first Kryn warriors appeared on the ridgeline to the north, their armor gleaming in the setting sun. They were tall, reptilian, moving with predatory grace. They'd fought humans before and won. They had no reason to think this time would be different. Then the shooting started. The militia's first volley caught the Kryn advance guard completely by surprise. 3 warriors went down immediately. The others scattered for cover, shocked that the humans had fired first, fired accurately. Daniel spoke calmly into his comm. "Northern line, good shooting. Fall back to position 2 on my mark. Eastern line, prepare for flanking attack." The Kryn regrouped and charged, expecting the humans to break. Instead, they found themselves running into a carefully prepared kill zone. Explosives detonated, collapsing a hillside onto their formation. Crossfire from hidden positions cut down more warriors. From orbit, Vraktor watched his tactical display with growing fury. The humans were fighting back with unexpected skill and coordination. His warriors were taking casualties. This was supposed to be a simple extermination. "Who leads them?" he demanded of his tactical officer. "Unknown, Commander. But their tactics are familiar. Defensive in depth, prepared positions, coordinated fire." Vraktur's eyes narrowed. "The Wraith. He's teaching them his methods. Good. I want him to watch everything he's built burn before I kill him." He gave new orders. The second wave launched from the ships, doubling the Kryn forces on the ground. They were done playing carefully. In the command center, Daniel watched the new wave descend and felt ice in his stomach. "Here we go. Second wave incoming. All units, prepare for heavy contact." The real battle was beginning, and the quiet man who'd hoped to disappear forever was about to become the Wraith one last time. The second wave hit like a hammer. Kryn warriors poured down from the hills in coordinated assault groups, their plasma weapons lighting up the twilight. Daniel's carefully prepared defensive lines held for the first hour, then began to buckle under the sheer weight of numbers. "Northern position is falling back," Kyle reported, his voice tight with stress. "Chen's group took heavy fire. 3 wounded, 1 dead." Daniel studied the tactical display, his face calm despite the chaos around him. "Tell them to execute fallback pattern Delta. Collapse to the medical center strong point. Eastern line shift to cover their withdrawal." The militia moved like Daniel had trained them, not running in panic but falling back in controlled sections, covering each other, making the Kryn pay for every abandoned position. But they were losing ground, and everyone knew it. Vincent watched the display with growing desperation. "We can't hold them, Daniel. There's too many. We don't need to hold them. We need to slow them down." Daniel marked a position on the map. "Once the northern and eastern groups reach the secondary line, we collapse the central avenue. That'll funnel them into the western approach where we've got our strongest defenses." He was proven right. When the Kryn pushed into what they thought was the colony's heart, they found themselves channeled into a narrow corridor between 2 reinforced buildings. Laura and her team were waiting on the rooftops. Their concentrated fire tore into the Kryn formation, dropping a dozen warriors before they could scatter, but the Kryn adapted quickly. They pulled back and began a systematic advance, using their superior numbers to pressure multiple points simultaneously. Daniel's forces were spread too thin now, gaps appearing in their defense. "We need to consolidate," Daniel said. "Pull everyone back to the final defensive ring around the command center. Initiate evacuation protocol. Get the civilians into the tunnels." "What about you?" Vincent asked. "Someone needs to man the cannon. Someone needs to make sure those shields go down." Daniel met his eyes steadily. "You know it has to be me." "No," Kyle said, stepping forward. "Send me. You're too valuable. The militia needs you." Daniel shook his head. "The cannon requires manual targeting and precise timing. I've done orbital calculations under fire before. You haven't. Besides, someone needs to lead the defense here while people evacuate." Laura's voice came over the comm. "Daniel, we've got a problem. Kryn strike team broke through on the south side. They're heading for the civilian shelters. How many? At least 15 warriors."
We can't get there in time.
Daniel grabbed his rifle and headed for the door. Vincent caught his arm. "You can't take on 15 Kryn alone. Watch me." There was something different in Daniel's eyes now, something cold and focused. The quiet instructor was gone. The wraith had returned. He moved through the colony like a ghost, using shortcuts and covered paths he'd memorized during the fortification work. He reached the civilian shelter just as the Kryn strike team approached the entrance where families huddled in terror. Daniel didn't announce himself. He simply opened fire from an elevated position, his first 3 shots dropping 3 Kryn warriors with headshots. The aliens scattered, searching for their attacker, but Daniel was already moving. He rolled behind a barrier, came up firing from a different angle, dropped 2 more. The Kryn finally spotted him. Plasma bolts seared the air around him, melting metal and scorching concrete. Daniel moved like water, flowing from cover to cover, each movement economical and precise. He wasn't faster than the Kryn, but he was smarter, using the terrain, using their aggression against them. He led them away from the shelter, drawing their fire, letting them think they were hunting him. Then he triggered the explosives he'd planted days ago in that exact location. The blast collapsed a building wall onto half the strike team. The survivors charged his position in fury. Daniel met them with knife and rifle in close combat, the brutal efficiency of a soldier who'd done this 1,000 times before. His movements weren't flashy or dramatic. They were simple, direct, and absolutely lethal. Block, strike, shoot, move. Each action flowed into the next without wasted motion. When it was over, 15 Kryn warriors lay dead, and Daniel stood among them, breathing hard, bleeding from a plasma graze on his shoulder, but alive. He keyed his comm. "Shelter is secure. Strike team eliminated." Continuing to cannon position. Back in the command center, Kyle stared at the tactical feed in disbelief. Did he just take out a full Kryn strike team by himself? "That's why they called him the Wraith," Vincent said quietly. The battle raged on through the night. The militia fought with everything they had, inspired by Daniel's impossible stand. They held positions that should have fallen. They made shots they didn't know they could make. Chen, the nervous young man who dropped a grenade weeks ago, saved Laura's life with a perfectly timed shot. Patricia worked in the medical center under fire, treating wounded without flinching, but slowly, inevitably, the Kryn pushed them back. By dawn, the militia was down to 40 fighters, clustered around the command center while civilians fled through the tunnels. The Kryn surrounded them on 3 sides, preparing for a final assault. Daniel reached the mining facility where his improvised cannon waited. He powered it up, checking calculations one last time. Through the targeting scope, he could see the Kryn flagship in orbit, its shields beginning to cycle in preparation for orbital bombardment. Fraktur had decided to end this. Daniel's comm crackled. It was Vincent. "Daniel, most of the civilians are through the tunnels. We're preparing to follow. You need to fire that cannon and get out of there." "Not yet. The shields aren't synchronized. I fire now and the shot just bounces off." "How long?" 3 minutes. Maybe 4. The Kryn will be through our lines in 2. "We can't hold them." Daniel looked at the calculation again, then at the fortress he'd turned into a firing position. He could seal the doors, hold this place alone for the time he needed. But if he did that, there would be no escape. "Vincent, take everyone through the tunnels now. That's an order." "What about you?" "Someone needs to fire this cannon. Someone needs to make sure those shields go down and buy you enough time to reach the emergency beacon." Daniel's voice was calm, almost peaceful. "This is what I do. This is what I've always done." "Daniel, no. There has to be another way." "There isn't." Tell Kyle he was right. The militia didn't need a legend. They just needed someone to believe in them. Tell Laura she's stronger than she knows. Tell everyone. He paused. Tell them they made an old soldier remember what he was fighting for. Kyle's voice came over the comm, rough with emotion. You stubborn old bastard. We're not leaving you. Yes, you are. Because if you stay, everyone dies. If you go, you have a chance. Make it count. Daniel sealed the blast doors. Now get out of here. That's a direct order from your instructor. Through the cannon's scope, he watched the shields beginning to align. Above the colony, the Kryn flagship powered up its bombardment weapons. Daniel made minute adjustments to his targeting solution, his hands steady despite everything. The Kryn ground forces reached the mining facility and began hammering on the sealed doors. Daniel ignored them, focused entirely on the timing. The shields pulsed, cycling through their synchronization sequence. Come on, he whispered. Just a few more seconds. The shields aligned perfectly. Daniel fired. The improvised projectile, more mining charge than military weapon, streaked into the sky on a pillar of fire and smoke. It punched through the atmosphere and struck the Kryn flagship's shield generator at the exact moment of synchronization. The shields collapsed in a cascade failure, leaving the ship vulnerable. Alarms blared on the flagship's bridge. Vraktur roared in fury as secondary explosions ripped through his ship's systems. The bombardment weapons went offline. The ship began losing orbit. On the ground, the Kryn forces hesitated, confused by their flagship's distress. In that moment of confusion, 3 Navy destroyers dropped out of hyperspace, responding to the emergency beacon the evacuees had activated. Navy weapons opened fire on the crippled Kryn ships. The 2 smaller cruisers broke orbit and fled. Vraktur's damaged flagship tried to follow, but took concentrated fire. The Kryn commander made the choice to retreat, abandoning his ground forces to save his ship. The Kryn warriors on the surface, seeing their fleet flee, began a fighting withdrawal to their remaining dropships. The Navy destroyers launched fighters to harass their escape while ground troops deployed to secure the colony. In the mining facility, Daniel slumped against the cannon, exhausted and wounded but alive. The blast doors finally gave way and Kryn warriors poured in, but Navy Marines were right behind them. The firefight was brief and brutal. When the smoke cleared, a Marine sergeant found Daniel sitting calmly amid the chaos, applying pressure to a wound in his side. Sir, we need to get you to medical. The civilians, Daniel said. There are colonists in the tunnels 5 miles east. They need extraction. Already on it, sir. We picked up their beacon. The sergeant looked at the improvised cannon with professional appreciation. Hell of a shot. That's what crippled their flagship. Just did what needed doing. They carried Daniel to the medical center where Patricia was still working despite her own exhaustion. She took one look at him and shook her head. You're an idiot, you know that. Could have gotten yourself killed. Wouldn't be the first time I tried, Daniel said with a tired smile. Kyle and Laura burst in, having returned with the Navy troops. They'd refused to leave completely, staying close enough to come back if needed. You were alive, Laura said, tears streaming down her face. Barely, Patricia muttered, working on his wounds. The Navy wanted to debrief Daniel immediately, wanted to know how a civilian colony had held off a Kryn assault. They wanted to give medals and make speeches. Daniel refused it all, just like before. 6 months later, New Haven had been rebuilt. The destroyed buildings were replaced. New colonists arrived to replace those lost. The militia, now properly equipped and trained by Navy advisors, kept watch over their home with quiet pride. But the biggest change was in the colony's school, a new building constructed near the center of town. Daniel Gray stood at the front of a classroom teaching history to 20 young students. He talked about courage and sacrifice, about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Kyle, now officially the colony's security chief, stopped by the window and waved. Daniel nodded back and continued his lesson. After class, Laura visited with her infant daughter. I wanted you to meet her properly. Her name is Grace. Daniel's eyes grew wet. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. You gave us all a second chance. Seemed right to name her after someone who gave you one too. That evening, Daniel walked through New Haven as the sun set over the desert. People greeted him by name, not with awe, but with warmth. Children ran past, playing games. Families sat on porches, enjoying the peace. He wasn't a legend here. He wasn't the Wraith. He was just Daniel Gray, the teacher who told good stories and sometimes helped with heavy lifting. The quiet man who'd found, after 30 years of running, a place where he belonged. He looked up at the stars, thinking of Helen and Grace, hoping they'd understand. He'd finally found a way to honor their memory not through violence or vengeance, but through protection and teaching, through choosing to stay instead of disappear. A small smile crossed his face. For the first time in 3 decades, Daniel Gray was home.